Salvete discipuli, hodie spectatis lecturam ūndēvicesimam capitis 39, Gerunds and Gerundives. Hodie discemus primum vocabula capitis 39, deinde grammaticam capitis. We'll learn about gerunds, that is, the future passive participle treated as a verbal noun. For example, moriundum means the act of dying or just dying. And gerundives, which is basically the same thing, but we treat it as an adjective, and we use it as an adjective for verbal nouns with a direct object. So, for example, res publica conservanda means saving the republic. Primum discemus verba vocabulorum capitis viginti novem. In hoc capita sunt 8 verba: ambulo, experior, libo, oportet, opugno, orno, pernocto, transeo. Primum verbum: ambulo, ambulare, ambulavi, ambulatum. Ambulawistine quam in somno? Quid significat ambulo? Femina in pictora ambulat in somno. Proximum verbum: experior, experieri, expertus sum. Scientistae experiendo hypothesis probant. Quid significat experior? Proximum verbum: libo, libare, libavi, libatum. Ante vinum bibendum deis libare oportet. Quid significat libo? Ecce Deus Apollo vinum deis libat. Proximum verbum: oportet, oportere, oportuit. Ante bibendum vinum deis libare oportet. Quid significat oportet? Proximum verbum: opugno, opugnare, opugnavi, opugnatum. Exercitus sauronis moenia minae tiritis opugnant. Quid significat opugno? Proximum verbum: orno, ornare, ornavi, ornatum. A Numenorianis Galadriellis armis ornata est. Quid significat orno? Proximum verbum: pernocto, pernoctare, pernoctavi, pernoctatum. Bubones sunt animalia quae pernoctent. Quid significat pernocto? Ecce bubo. Ultimum verbum: transeo, transire, transii, transitum. Sic transit gloria mundi. Quid significat transeo? Nunc discemus nomina vocabulorum capitis 39. In hoc capita sunt quinque nomina: aedificium, injuria, molier, transitus, ventus. Primum nomen: aedificium. Ecce aedificium in urbe. Quid significat aedificium? Proximum nomen: injuria, injuriae. Ecce ignoria. Proximum nomen, mulier, mulieris. Ecce symbolon, mulieres. Proximum nomen, transitus, transitus. Ecce transitus unius piscis ex hic in hic. Ultimum nomen, ventus, venti. Nunc discemus adjectiva vocabulorum capitis triginta novem. In hoc capita sunt quatuor adjectiva: cupidus, liberales, necessa, vetus. Primum adjectivum: cupidus, cupida, cupidum. Magister cancer pecuniae cupidus est. Quid significat cupidus? Proximum adjectivum: necessa. Ante bibendum vinum deis libare necessa est. Quid significat necessa? Ultimum adjectivum: vetus. Biblia Hebraica a Christianis vetus testamentum appellata est. Quid significat vetus? Okay, so the grammar of this chapter is something that's actually quite important. It's interesting that the textbook puts it so late in the game, but it's definitely something that we will encounter quite a bit as we move into real Latin literature, and that's gerunds and gerundives. So gerunds are another way of basically taking a verb and turning it into a noun. And you already know how to form gerundives because basically you're just taking the future passive participle and turning it into a second declension neuter noun. So let's take a verb we know and love, winco wincere, okay? We know that in order to form a future passive participle from which gerundives will be derived, we take the second principal part, we cut off the RE, and we add an ND plus the us, a, 212 endings, okay? This makes a future passive participle literally being about to be conquered or to be conquered, okay? And what we do is we turn it into vincendum. We turn it into a second declension neuter noun, vincendum, vincendi. And this has the meaning of the act of winning, the act of conquering, the act of overcoming, etc., etc. Okay? So there are other ways to express kind of the idea of nouns in Latin, but the gerunds and gerunds are a very common way of doing that. And of course, we do the same in English, okay? Winning, the act of winning, the idea of winning, that's a gerund in English, right? And so this is something that Latin and English both do, okay? So here are some common Latin phrases, what you might call them loci classici, of that use gerundives. For example, ars moriendi, okay? The art of dying. Philosophy is the art of dying, the ars moriendi. Okay, so this is from morior, moriri, mori, okay, to die, and then I took moriendus a which is the future passive participle, and I turned it into a gerund, of dying. But notice that it's in the genitive singular because it's the art of dying, because it's a noun. Docendo disco, okay? I learn by teaching, which is true, okay? So basically, Docendo is docendum, okay, the act of teaching, the idea of teaching, and then I turned it into the ablative, and it's an ablative of means. I learn by means of teaching, okay? Caesar bella gesset vincendi causa, or vincendi gratia, okay? So Caesar waged wars for the sake of winning, for the sake of being victorious, okay? So this is a very common use of the gerund, where we have either the word causa or gratia in the ablative here, and then preceding it is a gerund in the genitive, okay, which means for the sake of doing the thing, okay? So Caesar waged war for the sake of being victorious, for the sake of winning, right? Another common use of the gerund is with the preposition ad, which with a gerund has more the sense of for the purpose of, okay? So we work for the purpose of living, or we work in order to live, okay? So this is another way that Latin expresses purpose, okay? We've already seen purpose clauses, but this is another way, and as you can see, it's a very economical way to do it, right? We work in order to live, we work for living, okay? However you want to translate that, but ad can have the sense of going toward a goal, right? And so it can express purpose, right? And notice that ad takes the accusative, so here's a gerund in the accusative. Okay, so hopefully the concept of a gerund is pretty straightforward, given that we do the same thing in English. And again, you already know how to form it because you already know how to form the future passive participle. And of course, you already know how to deal with second declension neuter nouns, right? So hopefully all of this makes sense. Okay, so that's gerunds. A gerund is a noun. Now let's talk about gerundives, okay? A gerundive is an adjective, okay? Gerund is a noun, a gerundive is an adjective. What's the difference, okay? Well, you basically take a gerund and then you put it back into those 2-1-2 endings. So no longer are we treating it as a noun like this, but we're going back to that future passive participle with the us, ending. Okay, so again, a form you're already familiar with. However, we're treating it differently than as a future passive participle. So often a gerundive is used in the place of a gerund taking a direct object, okay? So sometimes you'll have a gerund taking a direct object, okay? So for example, linguam Latinam discendo discipula melior medicinae fies, okay? So by learning Latin, you will become a better student of medicine, and that's true. However, better Latin, or more common Latin, will be as follows. Lingua Latina discenda discipula melior medicinae fies, okay? So notice that instead of having a gerund taking a direct object, I'm putting what was the direct object in agreement with a gerundive, okay? Literally, by Latin being about to be learned, or by Latin being learned, okay, you will become a better student of medicine, okay? So in good English, by learning Latin, you'll become a better student of English, okay? That looks nicer than it does up here, okay? And so that's a good example of how a gerundive works. Let's look at a few more examples, just so that we're good here. And let's stick with Julius Caesar, but instead of his genocidal victories in Gaul, let's talk about his own comeuppance. And let's talk a bit more about gerundives, because they also have special constructions that are worth talking about. Okay, so let's look at this first one. Caesar gloriae accipiendae causa Galliam vicit. Okay, Caesar conquered Gaul for the sake of obtaining glory. Okay, so notice that when we talked about gerundives, we saw that you can use the word causa or gratia in the ablative with a preceding genitive of the gerund, right? So for example, I forget the example I used. Actually, let's just go back to it. Caesar bella gesset vicendi causa. Okay, Caesar waged wars for the sake of being victorious. Okay, so here's causa with a gerund in the genitive? Well, you can also use a gerundive that way as well. For the sake of obtaining glory, literally for the sake of glory being about to be obtained. Okay, but obviously we're treating this as a gerundive rather than as a future passive participle, and so better English would be for the sake of obtaining glory. Gloriae accipiendae. Okay, so these are agreeing with each other. We can also use gerundives with the ad plus the accusative to express purpose. Okay, so senatores ad Caesarem interficiendum coniuraverunt. Okay, the senators conspired to murder Caesar, to assassinate Caesar, to kill Caesar, right? So literally the senators conspired for the sake of, or for the purpose of, in order to it really sounds weird if you do this literally in English, towards Caesar being about to be killed, right? That makes no goddamn sense in English. But the same meaning in English is for the purpose of killing Caesar. Okay, so just roll with it. Okay. All right, I think that's it. So I will see you next time. Lēctūra.